everybody, QQ here with another tier list. This time around I'm gonna look at the physical skills available in 0.8 Stoneshard update. We're going to be looking at a similar list to my caster list. We have great skills, awesome, must have, will do you a lot of good, useful skills which are things that will keep on popping up. You're gonna keep on using them, maybe not every cooldown, but they're there to support you. We have decent skills which are, it's a skill, I mean, it's there, you use it, you need it for leveling your tiers of skill. And then we have skills that are going to be useful later, which are probably going to start showing up on your radar once you're closer to leaving Osbrock after the initial quests. So how am I going to judge them? I'm going to judge them for ability to do damage, ability to control the space around you, the quality of skills, as in most of them will be doing damage, but what does it do? Is there something that we can benefit more or less from it? And the usefulness to each weapon tree. Most players are going to be specializing in a very narrow number of skill trees. You might do athletics and a two-handed weapon, or combat mastery, athletics and a two-handed weapon, or one-handed weapon and a shield, or one-handed weapon and combat mastery, or one-handed weapon and a shield, or just shield because you're a tank and nothing can take you. So this is how we're going to be looking at it. So let's start. First one, we have Armor Breaker. Armor Breaker is a melee skill. It's designed specifically to do what it says, is to break armor and punch through it. It's very useful when you have a high defense enemies which are coming back later. So at the beginning, this is a decent skill. There is a better one-handed mace skill to be used. Should you take it? Well, at the beginning you don't have too many choices with maces. That is one of the active skills, but enemies just don't match up in quality of the armor to the skill being like, oh my god, this has to be it. Second skill, we have Battle Trance. Battle Trance is a staff skill which says that if you crit an enemy, all of your active cooldowns come down and you replenish 10% of max energy. This is fantastic if you're a caster, if you have a build that uses staffs as melee weapons and has somewhere to put that energy in. But overall, this is a skill that's most likely going to be useful later, as at the beginning you don't exactly struggle with energy because the enemies are usually coming in small packs, they're weak, the combat doesn't take forever, and you have plenty of times to do breaks. Blade Maintenance is a sword skill that increases the usefulness of your swords, decreases durability, increases weapon damage, gives you crit chance and crit efficiency. It is a useful skill for later. Later, when your swords get really expensive, that will matter. At the beginning, 5% weapon damage doesn't make a huge difference. Most swords are going to be doing between 17 and 18, 20 damage. This skill will grow in power later, but at the beginning is not. Again, if you're playing swords and you want to put all your points in one-handed swords, you have only 3 starting points, so by level 2 you'll probably be going to be taking it, but again, for usefulness, later better. Okay. Breakthrough. Breakthrough is a shield skill. It's a strike to 3 adjacent enemies, spending block power to cause damage. It has a chance of knockback, it has a chance of stagger, it gives different benefits depending if you're light or heavy shield. I found this skill to be a decent skill. Again, if you're playing heavily in shields, that might change. Maybe I would even put it in a useful category. The knockback of 3 enemies around is really good. It gives you a little bit of space control. It lets you rearrange the enemies. If there are traps, you can push them into it. So it is a skill that shows up on the radar if you're playing with a shield. Cauterize. Cauterize stops all the bleedings and, you know, worsens the condition of affected body parts. So there is the downside of you know, pain versus gain. The bleeding stopping is very neat, so that could be useful. But at the beginning, bandages are highly available, and you usually don't get bled very much. So it's maybe useful later. I wouldn't put my point into it at the beginning. Cleaving Strike is a great skill. It's a the sword skill. It delivers a strike across 3 adjacent enemies, does body part damage, bleed chance, provides counter chance for turns for each enemy. It's a fantastic skill. If you're using one-handed swords, this is one to take. Constant practice. Constant practice reduces the aim and accuracy penalty for each tile the enemies away from you when you're shooting a bow and arrow or a crossbow. It also gives you passively 3 accuracy. It is a useful skill to have if you have points as a range character. Constant practice should be on your radar. Cut through. Cut through is a single axe skill. It delivers decent damage, armor penetration, armor damage. It provides extra damage for each injury. But I think overall cut through is a useful skill because the damage will stack a lot later when you're actually capable of providing a lot more injury to your enemies. Axes have 4 starting skills, so you're gonna probably end up taking it if you're just doing pure axe build, one-handed axe build. So there's that, but it's not a fantastic skill. It's a really useful skill. It does a lot of damage, but it has a limitation which causes it to scale amazingly later. Dazing Strike is applies a negative effect on enemies that are dazed or staggered. One-handed maces, that's a decent skill. You hit, they are dazed and staggered, you get some bonuses. Nice. Deflecting Fury. Deflecting Fury is next. That's a block power, block chance. It provides you a really nice level of bonuses if you get attacked. So it gives you the ability to survive a little longer, which is very useful for one-handed builds if you don't run a shield. Destabilizing attack, staggers and knockbacks from staffs apply 25% damage taken for 5 turns, stacks 3 times. This is fantastic. Again, you have to be able to stagger and knock back, which means you have to have those stats, which means better staff or better stats overall. It's a passive. I won't say it's a decent skill. I wouldn't think of it as something amazing, but it's useful. Again, staffs have 4 starting skills, so eventually that's going to be taken if you're building a staff fighting enemy. If you're building a caster that uses a staff, that skill might not end up on your radar. Disengage has the chance of opportunity attack. That's a useful later skill. The reason for it is you shouldn't be maneuvering at the beginning. the goons aren't strong enough to threaten your life, or at least you shouldn't put yourself in positions. 2 goons shouldn't be a problem for any character to deal with. 4 to 6 are going to be a problem, but in an open space they are going to crack your head open. On the other hand, later, this is going to be very useful, especially if you're planning on going into dash and elusiveness on tier 2 and tier 3 of athletics. So disengage, useful later. Dismembered, it's a two-handed axe skill. I think it's a great skill. It does a lot of body part damage. It increases critical strike chance. It creates injuries. It benefits from injuries. It worsens things. It maxes out a certain level of damage. It's a mayhem. If you're playing a two-handed axe, this is the skill. It will make your enemies very, very miserable, and I'd highly recommend. Distracting shot. Distracting shot is another range shot. It provides vulnerability, but the penalty to damage and accuracy are very, very steep. So unless you're doing aimed shot before you cast distracting shot, the chances of you hitting something at the beginning of the game are slim to none. So it's mostly a mobility skill. Because it's mostly a mobility skill, I would say it's a decent skill. It's something that I would consider taking eventually, but I would probably take other archery or range skills before that. Double lunge. 2 strikes with daggers, if they both connect, lowers the cooldown. It's a fantastic skill. Fantastic. For daggers, it gives you surprisingly a lot of damage. Derwin starts with daggers. If you grab this, you can do fantastic things. Even if you have an offhand, if you have a weapon swap between range and daggers, this is a skill. So if you're building a ranger, have that in your second set with a dagger or 2. It's going to be very, very useful. Dual wielding training provides you benefits depending on if you have weapons of the same type or different type. The benefits are kind of neat: critical strike chance, removal fumble, hand efficiency, and so on and so forth. I would say it's a decent skill to grab. I think at the beginning of the game the benefits aren't great. I mean, the -5 to fumble is okay, but it's a decent skill. It's not great. All right, dying fervor. Hand efficiency below 50% health, more crit and counter chance below 35. Yeah, this is useful later. You shouldn't be getting down to 35 health. Not for the first couple levels, and then you should be able to afford a better armor and whatnot. Later, on the other hand, this is going to benefit you greatly because the enemies are going to hit hard. And getting extra hand efficiency, extra crit, extra counter for your dual wielding build, fantastic. At the beginning, I would leave it for later. Embodiment of Resilience. Each full block replenishes max energy. Useful later. At the beginning, you shouldn't be running out of energy. You should be resting. You should be drinking. Your food is available. That will come back later when you have a lot of skills to use. So you're constantly using cooldowns. You run out of energy. This is going to be useful if you're using a shield. Otherwise, I wouldn't take it. Feint Swing. Feint Swing is a two-handed sword skill that has one of the cooler abilities, which means it reduces the target's dodge, counter, and block chance to 0 until the end of the turn. Which means that you deliver a strike and you're not going to get hit back, they're not going to dodge, they're not going to block, so that usually lands and with reduced fumble chance and increased damage is just, it's a fantastic two-handed sword and great. And it applies a negative effect where they will reduce damage taken. So this is a really good skill. If you take two-handed swords, must have. Alright, Ferocity inflicts injury, reduces active cooldowns for this ability. Ferocity is a useful skill. Inflicting injuries happens a lot with access. Reducing active cooldowns is by 2 turns. That's a lot, which means that you can cycle faster. And since you access do a lot of body part damage natively, this is just going to keep on cycling through and allowing you to have a lot of more cooldowns to exhaust. Flurry, I would say, is a useful skill. Flurry is a skill that allows you 2 duo attacks with both weapons, so you get chop chop, you get 4 hits overall, but with reduced hands efficiency, which means that the attacks will do less damage and be less effective. It is really good if you have decent weapons, if you have decent stats. At the beginning, extra hits are extra hits, so that that there's bonus to it. But overall, I found it to be a little lucky comparing to some of the other skills. This ugly mug is from the shadows, and that means that the first attack against an enemy applies with damage taken, and thrown daggers do 30% more damage. Thrown daggers is something I'm still experimenting with. I haven't had a lot of success with it, but first attack on an enemy applies 25% damage is really nice. Now, would I take it over double lunge? No. I think this is a decent skill, maybe even low useful, but it's not a skill I would take right away. It's really good, and again, that will benefit you later. Gaping Wound is another dagger skills. It does high bleed chance, armor penetration, causes extra problems if you manage to wound somebody. Is it great? No, I would say this dagger skill is also in the decent category. Again, if you're a dagger, you only have two available active skills, so double lunge and gaping wounds are the only ones you have access to, so you're probably going to end up taking it, but I wouldn't put it as my first choice for this. Alright, we have Hail of Blows. Hail of Blows is a great skill. If you're using staffs, it provides 2 strikes, lower damage but higher stagger chance. The strikes drain energy, they cause daze. If both of them connect, you get a third strike, so you get bam bam bam. If you're using just staff builds, it's a bread and butter. If you're a caster, it allows you to reliably attempt to push an enemy off you with the knockback and cause a little damage if anything else is on cooldown and enemies are in melee. Hooking Chop is a two-handed axe skill. It's a useful skill. It allows you for rearrangement of locations on the battlefield. You get to pull one enemy closer. It has a little reduced damage but increased armor pen. It does damage one body part. It's useful. It's not as good as the other skills in two-handed axes, but because it has the ability to move enemies around and creates body part damage, useful. Impaling Lunge. This is a damage skill that comes from the Athletics tree. From the Spear tree. It allows you an attack 2 tiles away with a spear, with an extra body damage, armor pen, and bleed chance, but if the enemy is immobilized, it resets its cooldown, doing less damage. So you either get a strong hit or you get a hit that doesn't trigger cooldown, which I would put it as a useful skill. I think that skill is a bread and butter for Spearman. You nail down first, and then you get Impaling Lunge once, and then you get Impaling Lunge twice, so you get 2 times. It has a 2 tile, so you can pierce enemies through it. Useful, and the bleeds are always nice to have, because only some enemies bandage, and that extra 4 points of damage adds up. Keep them coming is a keeping distance. This is keep them coming. Keeping distance. Retreats 1 tile and then swings at anybody that comes closer. This is a single sword skill. It is a decent skill. It is quite decent. You step back, they come in, but it requires enemies to come closer. Although it does a stagger chance, bleed chance, it requires enemies to be shuffled on their own, so you don't control who's going where. It's situational. If you're retreating through the door, you have control of narrowing the field, but if you're retreating in empty space, enemies can surround you, so it's a useful skill. It's not life-alterningly great, so I would put it at decent. Keep them coming, which is a 2-handed mace thing, is killing enemies with critical hits or abilities or disabilities keys. 3 skills, grants the effect of Mighty Swing for 1 turn and restores. It increases mana restoration or energy restoration for 4 turns. Unapologetically useful later. You won't be doing a lot of crits, you won't be killing things right away. This will come later, where you can chain mighty swings over and over and over again, and that will be very cool, but at the beginning you're not doing that, so it's better to invest in active skills rather than passive skills. Leg sweep. Hit 3 enemies either around the corner or in a straight line, dealing some damage, and has a chance to immobilize, and then you get to retreat a little bit. Useful. This is useful. The reason for it useful is because it modifies the terrain with the enemies. You get to stop some enemies, you get to move back. It's in athletics tree, so it's available to most characters, while still maintaining either a weapon or a caster main tree. What else to say? This is it. You hit, you run, creating space, which is great. Mighty Kick. Mighty Kick is a kick that has a chance to inflict knockback. Knockback is a coin flip. If it works and you get to knock somebody back into a wall and you get to daze them or you get to knock them out, that's great. But by itself, moving one enemy back and without causing a lot of damage is a tricky proposition to spend skill points on in the first couple levels. I would say this is a decent skill. I would say maybe it's a little better. I would say it's a decent skill, but I wouldn't start putting my points just yet in there. Now, your experience may vary. Alright, bread and butter for two-handed maces, the Mighty Swing. I think the Mighty Swing is useful, just because you will use it a lot, almost every other turn, unless you have something else off cooldown. The downside of it takes one extra cooldown, one extra turn. increased damage, increased stagger chance, stun chance, body part damage, armor damage, all fantastic. But you have to waste a round in which enemies will get closer, in which enemies will get an attack on you, which means that if you're playing two-handed maces, you need to seriously invest into protection, which produces cost things. It's bread and butter for 200 maces, for two-handed maces. It's not a skill I terribly love. Moment of Retribution, receiving damage grants block power and so on and so forth. Useful later. You at the beginning, you shouldn't be getting into problems. The only character starting with a shield is Arna. You can buy a fist shield for all the other characters, but I wouldn't take this as a shield build if you don't have to at the beginning. Unless you have a plan to go heavily into shields, that skill will come into play later, not at the beginning. Moment of Weakness is a mace skill. It's a passive that allows you to have bonuses if you're fighting stunned or staggered enemies. It's a decent skill. It's always good to have benefits against staggered and stunned enemies. Maybe I would say it's a top range useful later skill. Eventually that will be a lot. 20% damage and 10% crit is fantastic, but that's not showing up very early in the game, because again, if you stagger somebody or you stun somebody with a mace, that usually requires more luck than skill or positioning, so let's leave it at that. Mutilating Lunge. It's a charge. It does considerable amount of body part damage, bleed chance, stagger chance. If it doesn't cause injuries, you reduce the cooldown by 50%. It's brutal. You step up and you start causing mayhem. And once you start bleeding enemies, once you start destroying their body parts, axes get really ramped up because they benefit from body part damage constantly being there. So bread and butter, fantastic skill for one-handed axes, highly recommended. I'll put it in the grand scheme. Nail Down is a bread and butter for the spear build. It's one of the best skills for that tree. It has higher crit chance, it does leg damage specifically, higher damage, has a knockback chance if enemies are standing next to you, otherwise does body part damage in immobilize if they're farther away. Just fantastic skill. No Mercy. Attack against enemies with less than 50% health, do 30% more damage for X. Yes, I say that's it's a useful skill, because 30% is serious. As much as I think at the beginning 5% extra damage, 10% extra damage doesn't make a huge difference, 30% does. And 50% less health means you'll be able to kill things off quickly, which at the beginning of the game matters, because a wolf with 10 health is as dangerous as a wolf with 50. So if you can start chopping it down with one hit versus 2 or 3, do it. No Retreat. No Retreat is a interesting approach to spears. It says that if you remain on the same tile, you get block chance, you get crit, and you get cooldown, which stacks up over turns. It makes spearmen positional fighters. Stand somewhere, find a good spot, round enemies around the corners, and just poke them to death. I think this is a useful skill, but I think overall it becomes a lot more useful later. At the beginning you should be able to nail down and then bleed them with a spear relatively quickly, so the non-retreat you should take it after you spend points somewhere else. The first 2 or 3 points shouldn't be going to that skill. Not this time. Grants fortitude, receive negative physical and mental effects, being immobilized, and so on and so forth. It gives you protections. It's a athletics skill. It's useful later. You don't need all that protection at the beginning, because at the beginning you either die or you don't, and you shouldn't be dying. Onslaught is a hit with a mace that knocks back. If it knocks back, you get to hit again. If you don't knock back, you get a reduced cooldown. It has higher damage, increased days. It's bread and butter for a mace build. Must have, does great things. Opportune Moment is each successful attack has a 10% chance to reduce all the cooldowns by 1 and replenish energy. Crits replenish it 100% of the time. This is combat masteries. This is useful. I would say this is useful later. At the beginning, again, you don't struggle for max energy, so yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. Parry. Parry is a two-handed sword skill. It gives you block chance, block power, counter chance. It has the effect of allowing your character to withstand a little bit more damage while you wait for your cooldowns to come off. It's a decent skill. There's nothing bad about parry, and with two-handed swords you are struggling a little bit at the beginning while trying to find a decent sword. Bastard swords are really good, but they're not always sold, and it takes a second to find them. Piercing Hit. Piercing Hit, when you attack immobilized targets, which spears are really good at because they do leg damage, lower fumble, higher body part damage, a little bit crit. This is a great skill, but I think again it's useful later. I would put it right there. I wouldn't take it at the beginning. There's some other skills that are worth taking, and again, as you can see the pattern, I usually put passives as picking up later rather than beginning. The first couple points should be spent on active skills that have higher benefit to your fighting capabilities. Quick Hands, on the other hand, is a passive skill in the Dagger tree, and this one says the following: if you hit with a dagger, you reduce cooldowns of dagger trees by 1 for every hit. So counter, that reduces. Your hit, that reduces. Your double hit, that reduces. And it allows you to switch loadouts from one to the one with the dagger without losing a turn. Which means that if you're a ranger and you have quick hands, somebody gets up to you, you press the button, you switch to daggers, and you still get to attack. And because of the cooldown reduction combined with double launch, these two skills, primo. Really good. Raise Shield. Activates for 2 turns, gives you block power, and so on and so forth. Downside is reduces your dodge, but again there's conditions based if you using a light shield or you're using a heavy shield. This is a decent skill. It's relatively strong. If you're using shields, that will get you a little bit extra time. Again, the first 2 skill points outspent on an aggressive manner rather than defensive, but the first 4, that's definitely a skill I would be taking if I thought about doing, say, a sword and board build. Reckless. Each adjacent enemy grants crit and counter, two-handed swords. Reckless, because two-handed swords are the way they are at the beginning, I would say this is a weak, useful skill. Again, the crit matters and the counter matters because two-handed swords are lacking some of the damage capabilities, say, axes have or maces. Seize Initiative. It's a buff that you apply for your that you can apply to yourself, and a debuff that you apply on an enemy on a successful hit. Accuracy, counter chance, reduces fumble, reduces cooldown, and the opposite to the enemy. You can level very, very high just having this as your only skill. It's one of the best melee skills, in my opinion, in the game. Most characters have access to it from the get-go, like Velmer, Jogrim, and Arna. It's fantastic. And it matches with whatever build you're hoping to do. Setup tactics, stance skipping and moving around gives you benefits. This is combat masteries. I would say this is useful. There again, you won't be using tactics because those are tier 2 for combat masteries. Skipping a turn is great. Extra damage, extra accuracy, damage taken. We could move it to useful depending on how you set up your build. It's a point I would definitely consider taking. I wouldn't probably take it in the first 2 or 3 points I'm spending, so the first 2 levels I probably wouldn't take it. Shield Breaker, 2-handed axe kill, reduces block power. It's a nice passive, but again, at the beginning, not many enemies have shields. Tier 2 enemies have shields, tier 2 human enemies have shields. So at the beginning this skill doesn't exactly is needed. I would consider taking it later, especially if I needed to level up my tree. But it's not a point that I genuinely looking forward to take with double-headed axes. I have skinning here, which comes from the survival thing. Skinning is a weird proposition, because skinning doesn't do any damage, but skinning allows you to increase your money intake. Now, why is it here? When the enemies that you can skin are usually hard to combat. Most level 1 characters are not going to be able to kill a boar, they won't be able to kill a wolf, they won't have enough damage to kill a deer before it runs away, or a fox or a rabbit. So why are we looking at skinning? Well, we're looking at skinning because in some rare cases you might be able to snipe an animal, and because sometimes you might get lucky and get some pelts, especially if you're fighting with crushing or piercing damage or bow. So I'm putting it here just to make you guys aware that this is a skill that might be worth a point eventually, but only if you actively and considerably consider the consequences. Again, losing a point at the beginning, very difficult for skinning unless you're, say, playing bow and arrow and you manage to kill a bunch of wolves because of lucky positioning and high crit chance, and then you get to skin them. That might be worth the point for the money, so to get better equipment. But money eventually starts being a problem and you cannot recover that point, so putting it on your radar. Step Aside. Step Aside is a useful skill. It allows a movement skill for staffs, allows you to chase down an enemy, cause extra damage, has a knockback chance, reduces active cooldowns if it inflicts knockback. It is a strong skill. If you're looking at staffs and you're building a staff, that's a must. Again, it has a very neat kind of usefulness where you're running through enemies and you're attempting to knock them back and getting cooldown reaction for it. Take aim. A must if you're playing an archer. I mean, some crossbows you can get away without it, but take aim is the shiz. That's the shizzle. 60% accuracy, 10% damage, must have, end of discussion. Thrifty, on the other hand, makes arrows and bolts less likely to break. I'll put it in a decent pile, say something close to the end. It also makes when you shoot bodkin arrows at birds. I haven't broken a single bodkin arrow while shooting at birds while having Thrifty, where usually regular arrows break down, so if you're willing to kill birds for 5 or 6 experience points, sure. It's very useful later because you're going to be going through quivers full of arrows, but at the beginning I wouldn't worry. I would consider taking aim and precise hits. Unbalanced knocking. Unbalanced is a skill for two-handed maces that applies control, resistance, and fumble chance and negative dodge. It's very useful if you're hitting a lot. You're not going to be hitting a lot. Take later. I wouldn't worry about it just yet. Alright, we're almost there. Unstoppable Force is a AoE hit from maces with high knockback chance, armor damage, some negative effects. While under the effect of Mighty Swing, the target is not backed, its ability are put on cooldown, so it gives you a lot of control. This is a useful skill. It is. If you time it right, it can give you a huge advantage on the battlefield. And lastly, we have Warcry, which does a little bit of damage and applies a bunch of negative effects to the enemies, gives you battle rage. I haven't played with the skill. I think I tried it only once. I haven't had the greatest experience with it. I usually get a lot more out of taking weapon skills or seize initiative rather than taking a Warcry from the Combat Mastery. So here's my list. Most of the weapon trees have at least one skill in the great skill tree, plus seize initiative, because that's just God tier. If I had to put that God tier, I would just put it on God tier. We have a bunch of useful skills, and most of the passives are to be taken later when you are full on points and each point doesn't make a huge difference. My name is QQ, and this has been my tier list for melee and physical damage skills for Stoneshard Update 0.8. Hope to see you next time. Bye bye.